that's for AV to come here. Anybody have it in the house?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
ma'am.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And then we have Brian Russell, the CW2 platform engineer with Army Software Factory. Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll start off. Alex, I'll turn to you first just to kind of set the stage in defining the problem. How would someone sort of use or manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum to hack into a DoD system?
Sure. Okay, we can hear me. So coming from a dual background of signals and cyber, the two are increasingly converging. They're with the advent of obviously Wi-Fi, but also Bluetooth and Zigbee and Z-Wave in the commercial and home sector, as well as the various RF technologies that power industrial control systems and embedded devices. It's become a priority for the DoD and the intel community as well to monitor these emissions and emitters and receivers, because any one of them increases your attack surface, right? So it's not just going in through hardwire anymore. Now you have an enemy who could potentially be at a distance, coming in through a satellite link or over shortwave radio or things like that. So as the attack surface increases, so do your vulnerabilities, and so does your need to defend against a variety of attackers in varying levels of sophistication.
Thank you. And so to the panel, is this just an Army problem, or are there joint service implications with this?
I think it's an everyone problem. I think we're all facing this. I think no matter what service you're in, you're going to face this. I mean, we see this all over. Even private companies have the same issue. I think we're all facing a very similar threat. So I'd say it's an us problem.
Angel, could you pull that microphone back?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. Both it's industry, it's academia, it's defense, and it's increasingly it's in your house. So this is a universal problem.
So Angel, back to you, looking from an Army Futures Command perspective. How is the Army tackling this from a strategy and policy perspective?
So I can only speak from the Army Software Factory, so we're nestled inside of Army Futures Command, and we look very different than the rest of the folks inside of Army Futures Command. So if you don't know what the Army Software Factory does, I highly suggest you pull up your phone, go on LinkedIn, follow us on LinkedIn, and find out what we're doing. But from a policy perspective, we definitely fall in line with any of the hierarchy policies that are going on and all of the training and processes. Unfortunately, I just am not able to speak on their specific approach, just because the software factory has a little bit of a different challenge.
And Brian, what do you see from your role?
Yeah, so I can cover kind of the strategic side of it. At the software factory, we start, because everybody comes from different MOSs, different walks of life, so we start building that fundamental knowledge from the tax stack level, and making sure that everybody is on the same page of knowledge once we move into out of the training and onto the floor is what we call it. But and it's also partnering with ECMA and ensuring that we're have a secure cloud infrastructure that we're providing to the software factory. It really just starts with fundamentals and building out from there.
Could you help us understand the Army Software Factory, sort of what the mission is, what they do, things like that? Who are some of your customers?
So I'll take that one. So we are prototyping the Future Force design. So again, if you don't know about the Army Software Factory, please go look it up. What we're doing is we're taking soldiers and a Department of Army civilians, and you can submit an application. Anyone in here that qualifies in that, you can submit an application and come in. You go through an interview process. After your interview process and you get accepted into the program, you go through about a 6-month tech accelerator, which we call a boot camp. We retrain you on skills for different paths, so you can become a PM, a product designer, a product designer, a UX designer, a platform engineer, which Brian is, and a developer. And we retrain your skills. Through that process, it's a very rigorous process. You don't just take a class, sit there, and then you end. It's very intense on top of having to do all the traditional things you have to do within the Army. They still have to go, pass your fitness test and everything like that. So after you've done that and you've gone through, we test their skills. We move them out onto what Brian called the floor, and you build software. And so building software is just a byproduct of what we're doing because we're prototyping the future force design and taking soldiers and retraining their skills.
Thank you. So Christian, for you, looking at kind of the future workforce development, what are some of the challenges or gaps that you're seeing?
I'd say, so I'm just going to start back at a different point, I think. So we train soldiers and Marines, I want to say in the fundamentals, but like at the low level on the systems themselves. So we don't teach how to use tools per se. We teach them how to analyze a system at the lowest level possible, because I think that this issue doesn't just deal with intentional RF emissions or unintentional RF emissions from real antenna, right? So the electromagnetic spectrum is pretty wide. Anything like heat is included in that, light, stuff like that. So you can actually exfil data through modulating power, or if you want to escape the electromagnetic spectrum, you can listen to a computer to steal certificates to see what it's doing, because that's mechanical spectrum, right? But so we went back to the drawing board and changed the way that it was kind of tool-driven for a long time, the way that soldiers were being trained. Now they're being taught how does an operating system actually work, and then they're taught in context of common operating systems like Linux, Windows, because if you can actually understand how a system works, you can start to analyze it, reverse engineer it to do whatever you need to, whether that's defend it or attack it. So.
Thank you. So Alex, you mentioned working with Dreamport. Could you just educate us on Dreamport, sort of your mission, what you're doing?
Sure. So Dreamport is a contract. It's a partner intermediary agreement through the Maryland Innovation and Security Institute and U.S. Cyber Command. But that's how it started. Increasingly, it's various service components, it's various other IC entities, things like that. So we've gone through different terms, kind of trying to describe what it is we do. From innovation center to mission accelerator to things like that. But what it boils down to is being able to rapidly do procurement and things like that, as well as develop key capabilities, whether they're offensive or defensive cyber at the unclassified level. And then, a good deal of our personnel are classified, so we can go to are cleared. So we can go to the requirements meetings on the inside, distill that into an unclassified format, and then only the last mile, so to speak, needs to be transitioned into a cleared facility. So this way we can take, something that might be 6 months of development time, cram it down into 2 weeks, and then transition it into a space where it provides much more rapid value, and especially with world events changing as quickly as they have been and are, that's increasingly valuable.
So we often talk a lot about challenges and obstacles to overcome, but have there been any successes that any of your teams have had that you'd like to share with us? Either technical or collaborative, working on the team?
Sure. So recently we received a challenge problem from Cyber Command. And so the nature of the work is unclassified. But the target is sensitive. So there was a post-exploitation framework that has become prevalent across the world, and so we were asked to perform vulnerability research into it and effectively do kind of a hack the hacker type deal. And so we were able to pull in people from the 90th COS down in Texas and various rapid capability development teams across the intelligence community, and have them all just come and sit at Dreamport or virtually because it was unclassified. And in 2 weeks, we had a full proof of concept that allowed remote code execution on the command and control servers of these assets that were being used by adversaries. And so with a little more time of test and making sure that we were using good tradecraft and not burning our tool the first time we used it, we got it into the hands of the cyber operators in less than a month.
Christian, do you want to talk to some of the projects that your team is working on? Can you?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
So maybe go to the next question.
Yeah.
All right, so kind of general question, but what do you see for the future as far as EW and management of the spectrum or defense of the spectrum?
I thought that was aimed at you.
Okay. Could you restate that again? Sorry.
Sure, so looking in the future, what's the future of electronic warfare, spectrum management?
Yeah. So training is super important. I think we have a massive technical qualified personnel issue. The Army's trying to catch up. All these services and the DoD and the industry are trying to catch up. But I think EW in general is probably one of the most misunderstood things or effects in the DoD. I mean, the Army thought it was artillery for a long time. We just finally got into cyber maybe 4 years ago. Moved it from Fort Sill to Fort Gordon. So we made some progress there. But misunderstanding how important that is on the battlefield. I mean, just in Ukraine alone, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned looking at how effective both Russia and I'll say commercial entities are in the EW spectrum. So Elon Musk kind of bragged a little bit about how they were deploying Starlink to give network access to combatants on the field for Ukraine, and then Russia was jamming them with whatever EW effect they were using at the time. And within a couple hours, they pushed a patch, or Starlink pushed a patch to Ukrainian terminals that allowed them to bypass it, most likely just changing whatever spectrum they were on. So jammers kind of work in different ways, but generally speaking, you can only jam a few things at once, a few frequencies at once due to power limitations. So that's kind of like the future of EW is getting qualified staff. I think in leadership positions now that are technical, understand the EM spectrum, understand how cyber interacts with that, and then letting it flow down from there, and also funding that properly. And I think a qualified technical leader in those roles would get that done.
You touched on a really good point, and you talked about tech talent. And so I think this is a challenge that we all face in the DoD. We do not have enough qualified people in this field or with these sets of skills to be able to sustain the threat that we face. And we realize that, we understand that. And so how do we fix this? So I would say if you are in the military or if you work around the military, ways to empower that is what you should be thinking of, because it is a threat that we literally are all facing. And if you don't think it is, then you're probably at the wrong conference, right? At the Army Software Factory, we recognize that we have a major gap in our future workforce, which is why we're prototyping, training, and developing soldiers to learn this ability. So that a great example, Brian, who's right next to me, he's a platform engineer, but the way that he now can think versus how he was thinking before, no offense, Brian, is significantly different, right? Like you go through a tech accelerator, any of you, if you go to a course and you learn from that course, it changes the way you think of things, and it changes the way that you're going to approach problems. So when we look at our future tech talent and we look at where we're going, one of the biggest things is where do we place these folks, right? After we train them, where do they go? Most of the time, we as the Army, I don't think we've figured out how to pay them enough to get them to stay in. And retention is the biggest problem. And it's funny because I feel like most people under 40 will say it. It's a problem. Like the pay is a problem. We need to figure out how we can retain this talent, not only with just pay, but with incentives to stay and wanting to do their jobs. So everyone around, like, hey, if you get out of the Army, I always say, like, I hope you go into the ecosystem and can go work for a company that will continue to feed and recycle and help out through this problem. I mean, the rest of the panel look at it. Like, you might not be in anymore, but you are definitely feeding that ecosystem in and around and working in this environment. So I'd say, like, one thing that we need to consider is how are we going to do this together like as the ecosystem and as the Army. What parts of the Army, how are you going to train them? How are we going to keep them? While we figure out the pay aspect, right? While we figure out the talent retention aspect. And when we look at challenges that we face, like you mentioned, having leaders that can understand this tech problem, we need people to stay in so that they can become leaders, so that they can understand this challenge as well. So we need to kind of keep them in so that they can solve this problem. Nothing's worse than having to brief someone that doesn't understand what the cloud is, and then having them say, oh, don't worry, we're not going to stay in the cloud for long. We're just going to go back and buying servers and racks. And like the moment of panic that you have when you brief that in a room, it's a problem. So I would say, like, we definitely face, and I can see us all facing that challenge. We need tech leaders. We need people to stay in and continue that growth. And then we also need to figure out how we can retrain massive amounts of people without putting them just all through the tech accelerator or all one through the where you teach. It just blank. Yes, the cyber schoolhouse. Thank you. I was definitely going to say something else, so thank you for jumping in. And these are areas that we have to look at how we can retrain the warfighters.
So, Brian, do you want to talk to
I was just going to take it. This should be a great point. All those things she said is correct, but it's also the next step. While we wait for these other things to catch up, the Army to catch up, but enabling and empower these soldiers. Like, that's one of the my biggest thing I love about the software factory is that I work with an EU4. He was a medic. He didn't have any of this formal background, like signal background that the Army gave me, like I did. But he's sitting here next to me briefing SES level staff on our cloud infrastructure and how we secure it. And so to me, that's huge, right? Like, where else in the Army or anywhere in the military would you see an E4 briefing an SES level on how we're securing his cloud infrastructure? So enabling and empowering, I think, also goes a long way, too, because that's how also you're going to keep the retention rate and retain these soldiers in the long run.
I think Christian touched on another really good point that was historically, in my experience, we have a kind of a bad habit of training button pushers and tool operators. Whereas, and I've noticed it's transitioning, and it's certainly something that we're doing at my facilities as well, is teaching the fundamentals, teaching how a computer works, how a CPU actually processes data and things like that. Because once that becomes more clear to a future operator or a future developer, then it's like learning like the fundamentals of language, where you can start picking up new things very quickly. If we teach someone how to use a specific tool from a cyber perspective, whether it's a proprietary thing or even just Metasploit or whatever, but they don't know or don't understand what that tool is doing and the method of exploitation and how to discover new vulnerabilities. Because a lot of these, especially a lot of these vulnerabilities and these exploits and stuff, I mean, there's a reason they talk about 0 day, right? Like 0 day, because as soon as you hit 1 day, 0 day being nobody has been aware of a vulnerability, 1 day being that it has been released, and as soon as it's a 1 day, your equity of this exploit is, let's just say, dramatically reduced, because people have had an opportunity to patch against it, to defend against it, everything. So, which means that teaching the same things we did before when it comes to tools and things is obsolete by the time they graduate. So, but if you teach them how to build their own tools and how to, do basic coding or scripting in Python or Bash or even, more, compiled languages and things like that, it goes a long way into trying to future-proof the workforce a little bit, giving them the tools they need to continue to grow and not just acquire tools in their tool belt. If they can build the tools themselves, they will be more able to defend against future things. The other part of the original question about the future of VW and stuff, one of the things we've been focusing on a lot is, and it's almost crazy to say it's the future because it's been out for quite some time, but software-defined radio. And because these things have been becoming so inexpensive. You can buy a cheap USB SDR that you can plug into your laptop for $25, $35 on Amazon, and that is enough to pick up signals. And maybe it's not robust enough to demodulate and decode and decrypt all these signals and things like that. But it's certainly enough to tell when something new is in your area, and maybe that's a team of soldiers who we've seen this. We saw this in the Ukraine, where people are carrying around these always-on devices, and it's real easy to identify a whole platoon when all of them have cell phones with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and all of these emissions coming out of them. So these devices are becoming increasingly inexpensive, which is difficult from how you try to go like zero emission or things like that. But on the other hand, it makes it so that you can develop kind of these quick commercial off-the-shelf systems that can do things like classify the signal spectrum using AI or ML and determine that a new signal has come up in the area, which we don't want our guys to get noticed by that, but we sure want to know if somebody else showed up in our area. So I think software-defined radio and the increasingly cheaper, because even a pretty robust USRP radio now is under $1,000. I mean, these are acquirable by just about anybody. And so I think that's going to be a huge driver in the future.
Thank you. I want to just pause and see if there's any questions from the audience. Yep, sir.
So on the cyber side, we have tools like NITAAC that help us understand tactics and techniques that are prevalent. On the electronic warfare side, is there something similar that, again, enables you to perhaps do better threat modeling, defensive tactics, if you understand what a nation-state actor is typically doing in the field? What we're seeing in Ukraine is an example there, and it may not be unclassified like MITRE's attack is, but is there something that's similar to that we're using to be able to help better inform our forces and also understand how to be more disciplined as far as defense?
Not that I know of in the unclassified or commercial sector, but that brings up, that's a very good point, and it brings up that, one of the hats I've worn in the past is penetration tester. So doing commercial, but that also includes local and state government and federal as well. And one of the things that I think is only just starting to be included is RF type of penetration testing. So it was a city government, municipality out on the West Coast. And one of the things we did was we dropped small kind of leave-behind antennas across golf courses and public pools and things like that, and picked up not just the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth low energy and the Zigbee and all that stuff that was out there, but also they had industrial control systems controlling the amount of chlorine that went into the pool water, and we were able to pick up those signals and perform basically reconnaissance on them from just a pen tester perspective. So if I can do that as part of a small team on a short duration pen test, certainly our adversaries can too.
Sounds like a great product a vendor should make.
Yeah, I'm taking it now.
So COVID-19 has changed a lot of technologists use within the DoD. They don't like working in skiffs. They don't want to go through and have to sit in somewhere. They want to let through sure comfort of having their iPhone watches and all that stuff. How are y'all addressing that from the Army Futures perspective?
So I can't speak on the Army Futures perspective because we can only speak on the software factory's perspective. But for us, everything we do is on class at the moment. So for the ability to be able to listen, the fact that you have to go into a skiff means that you have data that cannot be seen in a certain way, right? So let's just level set right there. We don't do any of that. So having BYODs, being able to leverage all of the unclassed stuff and the tooling that we use, it gives us the ability to be able to work from home easily. It gives us the ability to, a great instance is Log4j. When Log4j came out and we got the alerts started coming across, I think, 7:30 the night before. It was all over Twitter. Almost half of the team was up until 10:30, probably Western time, talking about how do we fix this, what do we look for it. And we were able to remediate it in a rapid amount of time. We have a great LinkedIn write-up, so if you don't follow us on LinkedIn already, please go follow us on LinkedIn. We have a great write-up on there about the entire story, so I'm not going to go into that there. But from our perspective, we should be able to leverage everything from an unclassed perspective, and we should have all the capabilities to be able to secure all of our environments on hand. I don't work in a classified space anymore, or at least not at the moment. So being able to use my smartwatch to get a message and everything, it's extremely convenient, and it also, I think, makes me more effective.
Also, do you think COVID-19 is what changed their mind, or do you think they always wanted to work?
They always wanted to, but COVID-19 was only shot across the bow for senior leaders because it was a damned if you do and damned if you don't. I just came off working on New Growth and Return Commission, and if I had a work center that someone got the bid, I would have to shut down that whole work center. So I had to do a risk-benefit analysis of letting my workforce work from home, and that was the only thing that kind of changed senior leaders' mindset, saying, hey, I can still do this without having to do the security detail wall.
Yeah. Honestly, though, like a SCIF setting is kind of like a good place for a developer, right? Because they need at least a 4-hour chunk of dedicated.
I don't
Well,
know if I agree
they
with
just want
that.
that 4 hours, and then they want to go home. So, just give them the 4-hour block, flexibility to go home after that. So.
Well, there is the advantage of never having to take your work home with you if you work in a SCIF. But, no, I think Angel was absolutely right. That one of the things I've been seeing increasingly is just whatever can be done unclassified should be done unclassified, and that was always the way it was supposed to be, but it just isn't the way it was. So we do, so we found kind of our general op flow is like I alluded to earlier. We have people who are cleared, badged, can go on site, can do the kind of requirements meetings and stuff. But for the most part, when it comes to tools and techniques and capabilities, the tool itself isn't really classified. What tends to be classified is the targets and things like that, right? It's the same as most other things. So for me as a developer, or for my team of developers, we don't care who the target is. It doesn't matter. If we have our requirements, it must do this, find a vulnerability in this piece of open source software. I don't need to know who's using it, or why they need it, or what mission. It's all irrelevant. It's just being given a set of requirements, addressing them, and then transitioning that back into a classified environment or something like that. So we've had to, kind of iron out a procedure for getting it on the inside, but obviously that's a lot easier than getting it back out. And another kind of perspective on this is you often, when you're developing tools, especially tools that are designed for offensive capabilities, or sometimes even defense, when you're in that arms race between offense and defense, and every time you come up with something, they come up with a way to defeat it, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time or a whole lot of money or whatever you can on developing these things, and often you don't want to use any what we kind of jokingly call guilty knowledge, right? You don't want to use classified TTPs to develop the tool if you can help it, because often you're going to throw it and then it's burned, and then you can't use it anymore. So ideally, you're going to make something that's using all, that bypasses their defenses using well-known, well-documented techniques, because that way if they discover you, oh well, you go back, you make the next thing, maybe you modify it a little bit to change the signature. Signature diversity is a huge thing lately. But to that end, that enables a lot of unclassified development and a lot of remote development. And through using the various technologies that have come out, as well as kind of like more old-fashioned things like just VPN and things like that, you can enable the people to work remotely in their house on these systems, which of course opens up a whole new set of challenges with how do you make sure their Soho router is adequately defended and stuff. But
would that matter if you had zero trust in place?
Right. If as you have like data-driven security instead of endpoint-driven security and things like that, you're starting to reach where you can have a geographically diverse and a system-diverse kind of workforce that's able to work from home, not in a SCIF, and we can address what these young workers are hoping for while still getting the mission needs met.
Can I poke a hole in that?
Go for it.
Okay. So we're talking about electromagnetic stuff. So even if their cell phone isn't hacked, that they're listening to whatever they might be saying or listening to whatever, there's still a lot of very sensitive antennas and other ways to take measurements from like the keyboard strokes from their computer or whatever's coming out of their desktop or whatever. So you're still at substantial risk, I'd say, even doing that.
Yeah, I won't disagree that risk management is going to be a huge thing in having a diverse workforce, and that's a challenge that we're addressing and will be addressing for the foreseeable future. I don't think there's any way around that.
A skiff in every house.
Well, yeah, or something like we've used not as a defeat against measuring like keystrokes or whatever, but there's tabletop Faraday cages and things like that go a long way into helping secure these things.
Sir, back.
Yes, I heard you mention Dreamport there. There's a number of innovation collaboration operations out there, SoftWorks, Georgia Science Center right across the parking lot. What makes the Dreamport and Mindscape and some of those unique or special in your opinion?
So Dreamport, part of the things that make it special are. So it started out being I don't want to say beholden to, but predominantly funded by one organization, and by Cyber Command. And as the kind of the power of like the PIA contract vehicle has been noticed and exercised and things like that, we have a very diverse set of customers now. We've been working with NICWICH, we've been working with Marforce Cyber, we've been doing and some of this is capabilities development, some of it's like RDT&E and testing, and some of it is workforce development and training, and whether that's us training people ourselves or whether that's bringing in external people and just kind of using it as a facility. But all of that gives us a very broad set of customers, which also gives us a very broad perspective into when one particular customer has a challenge problem or a particular like distilled requirement. There's been plenty of cases in the past where we've noted that somebody else has that solved already and can put them in touch. So connecting people and organizations together is another differentiator, I'd say.
And I think that's a good point too, Angel, if you wanted to talk about a little more into the Army software factory, but I know you came out of Air Force Kessel Run as well, so similarities or differences from the services from that perspective?
There's major differences in the services, I will say. Having worked with the Air Force and then working over in the Army, like night and day, about even just how the mannerisms of how people talk. I absolutely love working for the Army. Sorry, Air Force. But I will say, coming from Kessel Run and doing a lot of, standing up a lot of the cybersecurity over there, and then coming over into the Army, one gap that I saw was that the software factories were not talking. We were all kind of meeting with each other. So, like, it was literally text message city in between, like, the folks that had left Kessel Run. They're now sprawled across the ecosystem and everywhere. So we had an idea at South by Southwest. We got everyone together. We cornered them in a room, and we said, we want to do this together. And we started the Software Factory Coalition. So now the Software Factory Coalition meets. We meet about once a month, and then we meet in person about every quarter. If you think you belong in that group and you identify as a software factory, and we had some identity issues, who really identifies as a software factory or who should be, but we have some core missions that we have to work on, but what we're looking to do is bring in other parts of the community. So how do we bring in Cyber Command to come help these software factories from the Army's perspective? What are they doing? How can they help us? How can we strengthen these software factories with their personas? And I think that that is one area that I see improvement across all of the services, is that all of the software factories are now talking, or everyone who identifies as a software factory are talking on a regular basis that is not in my text messages one by one and copying, pasting over. Kobayashi Maru said this, let me paste it over to Kessel Run, or start a group DM, and then we always have to create more group DMs. So I'd say, like, the forever threat that we face, and on the topic here that we're talking about, it's something that all software factories have talked about and how we challenge that and what we're going to do about it. And hopefully we'll bring it up in September when we meet at our next event.
Which is when, Angel?
I'm not releasing the date, but if you happen to be in Austin with, I'm not going to plug another conference, but there's another conference going down around the same time, and so you can hit me up and I'll give you the details. Yeah, so the software factories is government only, and you have to belong to a software factory. We're figuring out how we include everyone else around it to be a part of it. So we're figuring out how do we include other areas of the Army or of the Air Force that want to contribute to our problem sets, and then how do we include the ecosystem around it as well? Because there's a lot of great knowledge out there from our vendors and our partners that feed this ecosystem, where one might be leveraging a certain tool and product and the other one's not, but we might be able to learn from that aspect. So we're trying to figure that out right now.
So, question on the Army software factory and factories in general. I mean, are you leveraging like Iron Bank and Platform One? Are you promoting a common dev tool chain for all the different factories, or is it freedom the experience? And how is that working?
Yeah, so I would say not all AOs are created equal. So not everyone wants to take the same amount of risk as everyone else does. So we talk and we work very closely with the Platform One team. We had a working group about containers and creating documentation for containers and how we all use them. Whether we use their products or not, we work together to find common ground. And so we had several working groups that just went on. I think the final signature happened yesterday on one documentation that's about to go live. But we figure out ways to work with each other, and whether or not we use their product or we build it ourselves, that we take their lessons learned so that we don't make the same mistakes, or that we can continue on to make improvements. And I think all software factories are looking to do the same thing. We want to work smarter, not harder, is like that famous saying. I'd say all of us want to do that.
In the back, yes, ma'am.
So thinking about national security as a shared responsibility, right? Not just for the industry, academia. But how are you working with other PMEs, military education, to really collaborate on tech talent as well as tech innovation and, probably more importantly, innovation adoption?
Is that towards me? Oh, it feels like
start
that.
with you.
Feels like that one's towards me. We spend a lot of time, our senior leaders in our program spend a lot of time talking with other areas of the Army on how that's done, how we can leverage that. We do have other branches that are interested in what we're doing at the software factories. So we invite them down, we teach them. Brian, I know, has personally worked with folks and educated other parts of the DoD of what we're doing and how we do it, that want to leverage the same innovation or the same culture that we have. So I'd say it's an ongoing effort. I don't think we have a clear path forward, but more of like we're open to collaborate with anyone, and that someone that wants to be along the same path, we're happy to talk to them and have it go on this journey together, right? Because this is changing the workforce.
Brian, do you want to add anything there from your experience?
From my experience in the Army, organizations like to keep to themselves. They're very, we're doing this, y'all are doing that the wrong way, you need to get on board with how we're doing it, or we're not going to work with you. That's not the approach we're taking at all. And I think that's the big barrier we need to break in the DoD in general. I know I can speak on the Army's behalf, but getting that cross-collaboration, right? Understanding that my way might not be the best way, and just being open-minded to work with other organizations, other commands. We've seen it already within the last year and a half. Commands will come and they'll be there and then leave, and then we don't hear from them. And then it's like, okay, well, did we do something wrong? It's like, well, no, they don't want to. They think the way they're doing it is the right way, which is fine, and that's okay. That's okay for them to think that way. But that's not the game we're trying to play, right? We want to be open. We want to be collaborative with other organizations and industry leaders, that kind of stuff. So I think that's a big part of it too, is breaking that barrier.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I was thinking about, we were the first issue of the CIPR from home, so we kind of understand the security issue. And I think with COVID, we realized what we thought and what was always like not possible is now become possible when we do command. And what we were hearing from Cyber Command is the recruitment factor. You know, we're so communicating on the outside that when we go inside, it's so disconnected that can recruit. So what challenges and needs are you finding to recruit and also uncover the workforce to be able to offer that kind of connectivity?
I'll take that one.
I was going to look to you
Yeah.
for that.
So I think I've interviewed probably 1,500 people, developers, cyber folks, over the last 2 or 3 years. I think I've hired 69 full-time developers and instructors, all those sorts of people. So I have a couple different strategies. A big part of that is something I forgot to talk about earlier, is to actually bring people into the industry, into the DoD side of the house, by getting them their clearance, starting that process a year, 2 years in advance, just to make sure that I have that person where there's people ready. Sometimes I pull from a different country for some talent. We get them their U.S. citizenship, we get them their clearance, and by the time that's all done, we've got work for them, and they can come and supplement the force, if that makes sense. That's a huge strategy. And then I also have a couple different programs that take people in college or directly out of college, and they can work as developers and all sorts of things at like our corporate back office, doing whatever we need them to do, getting trained up, getting their clearance, and then eventually they end up on Fort Gordon or wherever they're going to work at that time.
I think, so something that I think there isn't necessarily an exact answer for is some of the best work or ideas that will be had are kind of like drive-by, right? Like you walk by someone's desk, you start a conversation, and you end up, having like a new idea or something like that. And that can be, thankfully with COVID, and of course, there's been an increase in collaboration software, and everybody's, Teams is fine, and then there's Slack and Zoom and all these others, and so. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that from like a developer perspective, you want to make sure that they're empowered and uninterrupted as kind of much as possible. So that's a kind of a difficult balance to find, but there is a good deal of value in kind of doing your daily stand-ups. You kind of bounce ideas off each other. You have some text or offline-based communication that you can do, and otherwise you kind of let them, get on a problem, get focused on it, and run for a while. And so finding the exact right balance of that can be a challenge. But we've found that open, chat channels and things like that, as well as we've experimented with some things like having an always on camera in like one of the rooms at the building, not in somebody's house, but where like you can kind of do like drive-by talks like that and things. We have multiple facilities, so we're investigating the idea of having the conference rooms just kind of permanently video chatted together, so that way people can walk in and out and do stand-ups. I know that's been done by I think it was LinkedIn and some of the other big companies to connect geographically diverse workforces. So that's kind of like an ongoing challenge and an ongoing evolution of how we're kind of addressing those things. So I don't think it's been definitively answered yet, but I think we're getting just a little better as we go.
Yes, sir.
With the impending demise shutdown of DITB, are there any lessons learned that you can share about working with some of those Army customers who migrated to other locations?
As once a DI2E customer, I will say it was very hard working in using that tool. So I think if there's a better tool available, I know that from the Create perspective from ECMA, so the Software Factory, we contribute to the DevSecOps ecosystem with ECMA, so we help contribute to their platform. We are seeing an influx of folks coming over from DI2E that I think have wanted to use these tools for a very long time, but just didn't have them available to them. And they realized that they could have their productivity or be able to respond better, or to be able to just have updated software that was available in a good, timely manner to them. And I think that the biggest challenge is understanding what your users want and your needs want. And while they're not our customers, we're just contributing to a platform to be able to help. It is nice to be able to see folks that are coming off of DI2E say, it's so great to be able to come into Create, and I'm so glad that you guys have these sets of tools and that I can work with it. My heart goes out to all those DI2E folks that have to move off. That's a challenge.
So another question for the panelists, if you had the ear of your leadership or, leadership from another service even, what are some of your sort of wish list requests or things that you would want to at least start a conversation about?
Do you want me to go first? I mean, you might have to cut me off in time box. Okay, if I had a wish list, let's go. All right. I would say for now personally, I have not experienced this, but I have heard other people experience this across the Army. The leaders that I work with are very open-minded and have the ability to say when they don't know. But when I speak to other areas in the Army and they're trying to do things, and they're like, well, my leader doesn't understand what cloud is. My leader doesn't understand what Terraform is. My leader doesn't understand. That is a problem, and that's a challenge. And there's a lot of power in saying, I just don't know, and then we can help them, and we can help educate them. So I would say if I had the ear of senior leaders in the Army, it would be to encourage people to be vulnerable and know that it's okay to not know all the problems. It's okay not to know all the answers, and know that there are people around you that are going to support you and help you with that to be able to go forward. I would also say if you are not involved in an initiative to figure out how to retain talent, get involved in that, because I think that's a very big problem that we're already seeing and that we're going to continue to see. I would also say come on down to the software factory and see how things are done, and see what you can take away and what lessons you can bring back to your area of the Army and or of the DoD in general, and perhaps you can bring in some of that culture to create a really great work environment that people want to continue to work in. So while you might not be able to match their pay fully, the work environment is something that will make your people stay. Brian, do you have...
She nailed it. The work environment's huge. That's a big part of our software factory, and I'd go back to what I said earlier, empowering and enabling. I can't tell you how many courses I've been through in my Army career. I go and do this awesome training, I get back to my unit, and I go right back to my foxhole and never given the opportunity, never given the license, never, whatever it is, but never get to touch it again in a professional level. So that's huge, right? Like that kills morale. That kills, why am I going all this training and getting all this stuff if I'm not going to touch it for another 5-10 years before I get out? So enabling and empowering is a huge part of what we do at the software factory. And that's, until the rest of the Army figures it out and gets it together, I think that's how we can, at the software factory, are tackling the retention and that kind of stuff. So
I guess maybe adding because no disagreements at all there, maybe adding a third E would be experimentation. Innovation is hot, but you want to empower and enable your workforce and give them time to work on projects that they're passionate about and things like that. And of course, mission needs need to come first. But one of the things we try to do is allow people to determine how it is that they want to grow, because it is going back to being vulnerable. I mean, cyber and EM and all of these things are such just massive. It's such a massive breadth of information, and there's so many things that you can drill down to and get so deeply into that I think we've been successful in kind of allowing people to figure out what it is that they're interested in, whether it's maybe in the beginning it's just I prefer networking to software development or something like that, but then allowing them to kind of play with things, and so much of the software is open source now, so it doesn't cost anything beyond time, and letting them kind of play around and giving them room to experiment and grow in labs, and that's how we start to address the lack of qualified personnel, because it's impossible right now for us to find all the personnel we need to staff all of the billets and all the requirements that we have. So our new kind of like internal motto or ethos or whatever is then we'll just make them. We can't find CNO developers, so we're just going to create them, and we're going to find people who want to learn it, and we're going to teach them, and we'll take a sysadmin or a network engineer or a software developer, and
that's what we do. That's us.
Yeah,
that's what we're doing.
Right. So this is coming up in different places, and taking these people and turning them into these highly valued skill sets. And that's how we're going to end up with the workforce we need, not just hosting a rec online and trying to hire externally all the time.
I've got two. So technical strategy is kind of what America has won most of its wars. If we lost a war, it was kind of a misuse of technical strategy. So what I mean by that is we won World War II with the Sherman tank, not the Tiger tank, right? Sherman tank, not as good as the Tiger tank, but we could produce a lot of them. You know, if there's 8 Shermans, you can kill a Tiger. So technical strategy and funding a lot of and the correct technical innovations, I think, is probably the most important thing that the government can do right now, leadership can do. The only thing that would be second to that would be increase funding for personnel training. So increase the amount of instructors and developers and all those things that go into creating and finding cyber operators and developers, and trying to get people to understand that it's not a career, it's more of a lifestyle. So those are my two.
That actually brings up one part of the challenge is also finding the people with the drive to do it. Like I talked about, enabling experimentation, because like Christian just said, if you like getting a degree or getting one course or whatever, it just isn't enough. It's so there's a need for people who spend their free time reading or growing or learning or things like that. And then the last thing would be we're still kind of defining realistic expectations about how long it takes to get a qualified person in. A lot of the time, I'll get kind of a request that's, let's take this intern and turn them into a C&O developer in 2 months, and it's not possible. Not you can teach them a skill or a technique or tools, and we've done great things with turning around quickly and kind of producing generalists, but a lot of times the level of expertise that's expected is just doesn't match the amount of the training time that we're given.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I wanted to give each of you kind of a couple minutes for closing thoughts, comments. So Brian, we'll start and then work down.
I don't have anything. Appreciate it. I'm just glad I was able to be here. Last minute on here, so I'm just glad to be here. That's all.
So I think my closing comments are be a positive member to this ecosystem. Figure out ways that you can help. I know there's a lot of folks in the audience that are in, and there's a lot of people that are in the DoD, and then there's people that work around the DoD. Be a positive member in that energy. So, find ways to enable. If you send out 100 emails and no one bites, continue to send out those emails. You might get that one person that will figure out how to leverage your technology and use it and bring it in, and it can make a good change. I would say go find us on LinkedIn and follow our mission. We have a lot of really cool stuff that's going on and how we are changing the Army and how we're looking forward to developing these future warfighters. So I would say go there, follow their journey. It's absolutely amazing what goes on down there in the software factory. And if you haven't been and you want to come visit, definitely go hit that contact link and reach out to us, because we're doing amazing things. And I can't say enough about the great things about our soldiers and how we're retraining them, and then they're making amazing applications that can actually be used downrange in the field, in a tactical environment, offline, all of the criteria they're able to do. And Brian we came to the conference together, and I brought him on the panel with me because I think hearing the soldier's voice is always extremely important to me. So I always try to bring a soldier along with me. So thank you, Stephanie, for accommodating.
Everything runs off cyber and EM. So if you have a 6th-gen fighter, it doesn't matter if it's operational or if you have it. If it is hacked or jammed or whatever, you can't use it anyway. So this is probably the most important fundamental piece, I think, of every technical innovation going forward is electromagnetic and cyber defense of that thing. So.
Yeah. Similarly, come check out Dreamport. Come see some of the things that CyberPoint's doing. We are establishing the CNO Center of Excellence. But yeah, it's worth mentioning that there are difficulties in the length of time it takes to train operators and things like that. But these soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines and civilian workforces and stuff, it is consistently impressive how intelligent and how capable and how dedicated and how interested they are in all of this. When you give them the tools and the freedom to learn and experiment, the amount of things that have come out of internships or these 8-week programs or 12 weeks or whatever, and by the end you do have people who have like these fundamental knowledge points, and then they take that and synthesize it into an idea that I had never considered, my leadership had never considered, all of these things. So there's a lot of room to grow, and if we dedicate the resources to allow the incoming personnel to grow, they will, and I think they're going to impress all of us.
Thank you all so much. Sir, did you want to have some closing remarks, or Tina? We're a couple minutes early, but I wanted to give some time if there were any administrative comments.
John, thank you for putting together this panel. You never know when you think people put expertise, but you never know how they're going to play off together. And I think this is really interesting when they play together. So thank you very much, Alex, Chris, and Angel. Thank you, Brian, for being the last one to add. Great job moderating, Stephanie. Thank you all for being here. The panelists will stay. If you have a few questions, if you want to come up. Otherwise, we're going to dismiss. Go back to the networking and have a great AFCEA afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, guys.
Thanks.
I think so, in the DC area, and you're based out of Boston, right? We've been joking that we track out of Boston, Massachusetts, but, so yes, I have heard you speak a number of times, but this is the first time that I've heard you mention off-site needs of software factories. So it's a really productive discussion. Paul Bucket, Mike Casey, and those who really get the inspiration to some of the CTS and XPS software as a service and some of the cloud marketplace. GSA would love to have a presence in some of those meetings. Yes, I do. So, we've been doing it since the software factory, working with a gentleman out of Detroit Arsenal on what So I think we're going to try GSA has and that's actually made us software factory. Anyway, I got the